A biblical perspective on life, culture and current events. This is 2020 on Vision.
Hey, let's turn our attention to Christian views around the issue of euthanasia and the fact that there seems to be a growing enthusiasm. I mentioned MAID, medical assistance in dying. Oftentimes here in Australia we make that reference VAD, voluntary assisted dying. It all comes under that sort of banner of euthanasia. Most states and territories around Australia now have some form of VAD laws. And Christian commentator Stephen McAlpine back with us. He's written an article called When the Made Men Run the Asylum, the growing and widening enthusiasm for euthanasia. Stephen McAlpine, an award-winning Christian author, pastor and national consultant for churches and Christian schools. Hey, Stephen, a special welcome back to 2020.
Good to be with you, Neil.
Hey, Steve, across the West, we're talking Western nations, Australia included, the UK, the USA, and lots of other nations that are aligned with Western values, using this term MAID, M-A-I-D, medical assistance in dying, becoming more popular. It's been pretty popular in Canada, hasn't it?
Yeah, it has. And I always say that Australia is probably closest to Canada in its framework of thinking. You know, we're not so much like the US, we're probably more like Canada. And Canada is a perfect example of what the future will look like if you take the slippery slope argument on VAD here, for example, which I do, because it seems to be that's the way these things tend to trend.
In fact, you're pulling no punches. You say Canada is killing itself. And fellow Canadians killing one another. I mean, you're not holding back here, Steve.
No, look, I'm quoting from The Atlantic, which is quite a liberal progressive journal, and it actually says it is too soon to call euthanasia a lifestyle option in Canada, but from the outset it has proved a case study in momentum. It actually accounts for 1 in 20 deaths, and it says more than Alzheimer's and diabetes combined, and in 2 years MAID will be made available in Canada to those suffering merely from mental illness, not merely in the sense of it's nothing, but not terminally. And it's also recommending granting access to minors, which is, that seems a long way from what we're told it's going to be done for across the West. And the slippery slope argument holds true when you look at so many of the ethical issues we deal with.
Okay, slippery slope in Canada, a real illustration of what happens. Here in Australia, Steve, let me just, my little bit of research before coming to our conversation today. You know, most of our states and territories, except the Northern Territory, have some form of laws around euthanasia. And you're saying it gets worse from here. You say the slippery slope is on the way for Australia. Victoria had these laws in place since 2019. WA, laws began 2021. Tasmania, VAD became legal October 2022. In Queensland, 2023. South Australia, laws took effect 2023. New South Wales, operational on November 28th, 2023. And the ACT, their laws have passed and will commence November this year. And Northern Territory, not yet legal, but the Territory's begun consultations and formed an advisory panel, and legislation is not expected during the current parliamentary term. So that's a little quick illustration of what's going on in Australia, thanks to a little bit of quick research with AI there, so I hope all of that's accurate. So,
trust it though, Neil. Yeah,
but you know what, it's only just a few years ago, Steve, there was no VAD, there was no euthanasia in Australia. All of a sudden, you can hear all those dates. This is all the last 5 or 6 years. All of a sudden, we're on the slippery slope, aren't we?
Well, it's 10 years in Canada next year. So just watch the trajectories of the Western nations. And the UK is going through its own seismic parliamentary struggles on this issue as well, where one of the archbishops in London, one of the bishops in London said it's easier to get it will be easier to get euthanasia in London than it will be to get into the NHS hospitals to get treatment for something. And part of the issue is, as there's more pressure on our health system, as there's more pressure on financial aspects of life, what they've seen in Canada is people being offered MAID for homelessness as well. And that's something that the historian, Tom Holland, of The Rest is History, pointed out. He said that's a post-Christian framework of how we look at what it means to be human. And I think you can tie in the post-Christian ethical framework with where the direction of this will go all across the West.
Okay, let's just keep in mind post-Christian, and this is what things begin to look like. And, of course, the campaign around this in Australia, largely, you know, if you're thinking, who is the face of the euthanasia campaign? Most of us are going to be thinking Andrew Denton, who we love to listen to doing interviews and all sorts of things. But you describe him as a kindly face of euthanasia.
Yeah, and I think part of the issue for me is that all of the ethical issues we deal with in the West, we no longer have deep ethical roots that argue things from philosophical perspectives. We argue from aesthetics, what it looks like. So I was on a plane last week and Andrew Denton got on, and he did look like the kindly uncle because he's gotten, you know, everyone's gotten a bit older except me, of course. And I thought, yeah, that is the face of it. And the name of the organisation is Go Gentle. And ethics is shaped in the Western world by what things look like. And if you can have a good campaign to show what things look like, and look, Kit Denton, Andrew's father, was a writer, a well-known Australian writer who wrote the book Break 'em Morant, which we get the movie from, and he died badly, and as in like he's suffering, and Andrew Denton said never again. But there's something about the Go Gentle aspect of it that hides, I think, a very smiling face hiding a grimacing skull behind it in the whole movement of what it means to take or to end someone's life. I think we have let our ethics be run by a public relations campaign.
A public relations campaign because, you know, anyone who has had ageing parents and you've seen them off and they have sometimes died a quick death, other times been drawn out, very painful, and it's painful for the family. And so you can imagine how emotions run high around this when you've had ageing parents. But there are other dimensions, as you say, Stephen, that don't come into consideration when you've got, you know, a nice PR campaign around people dying gently. There's a lot of other dimensions here, and these are the ones that Slippery Slope is moving towards.
Well, I think the irony to me is that here we're pouring billions of dollars into mental health to try and alleviate issues, and at the same time we would offer mental health, people suffering from mental health, assisted dying. And that's happened already in the Netherlands. And the Netherlands is another case in point of a liberal progressive framework in its culture, which older people in aged care facilities get nervous. And they've said that somehow in a failing sort of in an aging population in the West, where there's a lot of pressure on older people, a lot of pressure on health systems, a lot of pressure on housing systems, being offered something that alleviates the stress for the rest of the community has a certain psychological pull to it for people. And I think we have not thought through this thing at all. And we certainly don't have a God framework in our culture which views life in a certain way. And the way we're looking at it now is very much an autonomous, individualistic perspective. You do what you think you should do. We can't tell you. We have no framework for thinking what it means to be human or how humans should live outside of you doing what you want to do.
The Go Gently idea has some level of, it strikes a chord with older people because you might be thinking about, dying, and that's not a very pleasant thing to think about. The younger generation, though, sometimes on this program we've talked about inheritance impatience and the idea that maybe we can do away with mum and dad or grandma and granddad. But what about the younger generation? There seems to be a developing enthusiasm amongst younger people.
Yeah, and look, that's what the Canadian surveys have shown over the last few years. And Tom Holland, the historian, points it out when he says, when he retweeted a tweet which shows that for people's attitudes in Canada to euthanasia, whatever percentage point thought you could have it for access to euthanasia because of poverty or homelessness or mental illness, just added another 10% percentage point And that's younger, 18 to 34-year-olds think that you should be able to access euthanasia. So it shows that as the population is younger, there's more enthusiasm for it. So that tells you in 30 years' time, when the country's been run by the 18 to 34-year-olds now, it'll even be a bigger percentage of people who agree with euthanasia for a wider range of issues.
You know, we do like to make some level of prediction around what will come. And I think when you talk slippery slope, you're talking about a prediction that eventually, one day, euthanasia will be available to everyone, depending on your mood on the day. Is that something that, you know, if you're talking about worst case scenarios, where a slippery slope leads, is that what you're saying?
Well, I'd have to be careful of saying your mood for the day, because obviously, you know, there's medical doctors have to sign off on things. But even in Canada, they're saying that in one day before the legislation took place, it was hard, it was impossible. The day after, it was easier to get than a tonsillectomy. And so it was less weight and for one. And so what you'll find, and I think this is wise, is that it's not so much linked to, the future isn't going to look terrible where people are being forced to euthanasia. It will look sort of bright and shiny, but no one will be able to give us a coherent reason why you should not, because of your autonomy, be allowed to end your life. There's no sense of a community in this. It's very much the autonomous individual should not be imposed upon in terms of the decision they wish to make. And that's what The Atlantic actually pointed out. It said it's a concept of patient autonomy, but a very radical one. And they're showing that demand for euthanasia in Canada is starting to outstrip the capacity to provide it. That's crazy.
You know, we could probably pause, and maybe we should just for a moment, around this idea of patient autonomy, because this sort of goes hand in hand with the autonomy and the freedoms we all are being offered for trinkets. There's a thought here that it sort of goes along, doesn't it, with the sort of even politicised way that our leaders might be offering us all sorts of things. This freedom, this liberty, this autonomy, which doesn't always hold to what it seems to promise, but that's actually having an effect here in this euthanasia issue.
Yeah, look, I said to someone, or asked someone, a Christian leader, I said to him, what do you think is the main driver behind the popularity and the spike in desire for euthanasia? And he said, maybe it's the loss of a vision of humans made in the image of God. And I think that's part of it. But also I think there's a lack of hope in the culture beyond. There's no framework for suffering. How do we suffer? There's no framework for how a community can look after people well who are suffering. But at the core of it is I can't tell you what to do. I can't tell you what you should and shouldn't do with your life. That's the slippery slope, or more to the point, that's the watershed moment in our culture where we say expressive individualism, radical autonomy is the decision maker in every decision we should make. It undergirds everything we do about sexuality, about what I do with my life, and even now, how I end my life.
Let's talk about the possibilities here. We've talked about the slippery slope. Someone's going to be saying, hey, Steve, can it be stopped? Do you have some ideas here? Is this a thing that you resolve with a political solution? Is there something here that we apply in our Christian ethics? What are your thoughts? Can it be stopped?
Well, it's interesting that the article in The Atlantic says this is the story of an ideology in motion. So whatever needs to counter it has to be going in the opposite direction with a theological framework or an alternate ideology. And it goes on to say this is what happens when a nation enshrines a right before reckoning with the totality of its logic. If autonomy in death is sacrosanct, is there anyone who shouldn't be helped to die? It's interesting the word sacrosanct is used there, and with autonomy in death, it's a spiritual term, sacrosanct. So we don't have a sacred understanding of life in and of itself, because sitting above that is the sacred idea of autonomy. So you would have to say that the Christians in the first century also dealt with culture of death in the Roman pagan world, and they showcased a different way of living. They showcased a life where they would value those who weren't valued. They would look after those who were a burden on society, they would take in the young baby girls who'd been exposed on the mountains by the Roman pagans because they wanted baby boys. The Christian community has a charge personally, but also politically, to show why these things are wrong and why we can do something better. But I think that's a hard push, because the whole, I guess the campaign around this is saying that this is a move to help people and to care for people, when I think it's the exact opposite.
Yes, the terminology, very important and very deceptive. So, in some sense here, you, as a Christian believer, you take a little bit of a individual assessment of your own heart around what you really think about the value of living and dying, and VAD, MAID. It starts, I guess, with the individual.
Yeah, it does. Look, I have a lot of empathy for the likes of Andrew Denton, seeing his father die badly. But my dad died badly, and it wasn't a great relationship, as in like it hadn't been. It was repaired. But one of the things that I noticed, and he was able to be brought to his death in relative comfort by the end, but for 3 or 4 years his life was pretty brutal. And what it did to me was it changed me, being someone involved in his care. It gave me mercy. It gave me empathy myself. And I wonder what society will look like if we can just shove that away from us. I think we'll be a merciless, very non-empathic society if we just continue down this path.
It seems to be politicians have had a deaf ear to the concept of palliative care being the equal weighted response, because politicians have withdrawn money from palliative care, and they've pursued this headlong, moving to VAD, euthanasia. The idea of palliative care, really, it's just around end of life, and we think of end of life as being you've grown old, or you have some disease and your days are numbered. Something is happening. You're not long for this world. But the end of life definition seems to have changed with VAD, with euthanasia, because lots more people are considered to be the end of their life at all sorts of different ages and predicaments.
Yes, and I think that's because we don't have a framework for how we deal with complex matters of suffering in our culture or deprivation. We have the good life, and if we can't have the good life, then we must have the end of life. And euthanasia literally means a good death. And that literally in the past meant dying with your house in order, with your relationships well ordered. And it meant that you were leaving this world, but you were actually going to another world. That's completely divorced from the picture now. The model of euthanasia is life will end, and every bit of conscience and suffering or whatever it is will end at death. So it's a very different framework. And Christians have it's a category shift and a different operating system compared to the Christian view of the world.
Hey, the article we've been talking about today, When the Made Men Run the Asylum, the Growing Enthusiasm for Euthanasia. Made men, that's got that sort of connotation too, doesn't it? The mafia family, you're a made man. There's a certain level of, I've made it. But MAID men running the asylum, is this the case, do you think, in Australia?
Look, it'll get there because it's 5 or 8 years behind Canada. And I just say we go with the same trajectory as the rest of the Western world. The UK is just starting on the process, and in 10 years' time, we'll just be like Canada. That's the way it is. There's no handbrake on it. And unless there were, it'll go that direction.
Okay, for listeners, you might want to check out this article that we're talking about today. And as you know, Stephen McAlpine, very thoughtful, well-researched in the way that he writes. It'll be on his website, stephenmcalpine.com. It's called When the Made Men Run the Asylum, the Growing and Widening Enthusiasm for Euthanasia. Stephen's an award-winning Christian author, pastor and national consultant for churches and Christian schools. That website is stephenmcalpine.com. Stephen, thanks so much for sharing your thoughts with us once again today on 2020.
It's great to be with you, Neil.
Thanks for taking time to listen to this audio on demand from Vision Christian Media. To find out more about us, go to vision.org.au.